People often think betrayal always comes with loud screams or shattered tears. But the day my boyfriend blatantly moved his brother into my apartment and threw a stack of bills totaling over $2,000 on the living room table, I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled, nodded, and quietly began to drain every last ounce of oxygen from his empty, arrogant little bubble. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Piper Davis. For the past 5 years, I have poured every ounce of my energy into my career, eventually securing my position as the Director of Strategy at Atheros Dynamics, one of the most ruthless tech conglomerates in the country. My days are consumed by high-stakes negotiations, complex data analysis, and endless strategy meetings. I am accustomed to carrying a heavy load, but the heaviest burden I carry is not my corporate responsibility, it is my boyfriend, Garrison Brooks. To the outside world, Garrison presents himself as a visionary. He wears perfectly tailored suits bought with my credit card and attends networking galas claiming to be a disruptive startup entrepreneur on the verge of changing the industry. The reality is a suffocating, exhausting truth that I have kept hidden behind the heavy doors of my luxury apartment. Garrison has not held a steady job or earned a single paycheck in over 3 years. His so-called companies are nothing more than a string of failed pitches and abandoned business plans. He sleeps until noon while I wake up at dawn to pay for every single aspect of our lives, from the imported groceries he demands to the lease on his luxury car. My grueling corporate hours fund his entire delusion. I tolerated it because I loved him, and because he always knew exactly how to twist my guilt, claiming his genius just needed a little more time to incubate. But every breaking point has a catalyst. Mine arrived on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening. I walked through the front door after a brutal 14-hour day at the office. My head was pounding, and I wanted nothing more than the quiet sanctuary of my home. Instead of silence, I was hit by a wall of blistering heat and a deafening, continuous mechanical roar. I stepped into the living room and froze. The pristine, minimalist space I had meticulously decorated was gone. In its place was a chaotic, sweltering industrial nightmare. Thick black cables snaked across my expensive hardwood floors like venomous vines. Huge industrial fans were positioned in every corner, violently blowing hot air in a futile attempt to cool down massive metal shelving units. These shelves were packed with dozens of glowing, humming computer processors. Standing amidst this suffocating metallic jungle was Garrison, his arms crossed over his chest, sporting an expression of immense self-satisfaction. Slouching next to him was his older brother, Vance Brooks. Vance was a man whose entire existence seemed defined by unpaid debts and poor hygiene. Before my exhausted brain could even process the violation of my sanctuary, Garrison marched over to my glass coffee table. He slammed down a thick stack of paperwork. The heavy thud echoed sharply over the roar of the machines. I glanced down. They were invoices for server equipment, industrial cooling units, and worst of all, projected utility bills that were easily 4 times my already exorbitant monthly rent. "Vance is moving in," Garrison announced. He did not ask, he did not suggest. He stated it as an absolute fact, raising his voice to cut through the deafening noise. "We are pooling our resources to run a massive cryptocurrency mining operation right here. This is the future. Piper, we are getting in on the ground floor." I stood completely still. I looked at the mountain of invasive machinery, then at Vance, who was casually wiping his greasy hands on my custom velvet curtains, and finally at Garrison. "You moved all of this into my apartment, and you moved your brother in without even having a conversation with me?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet, a stark contrast to the roaring fans. Garrison stepped forward, invading my personal space, his eyes narrowing into a cold, aggressive glare. "It is our apartment, Piper," he corrected sharply. He leaned heavily on the word our, completely ignoring the fact that only my signature was on the lease document and only my bank account paid the landlord on the first of every month. He tapped the stack of terrifying bills with his index finger. And you are going to cover these initial setup costs and all the utility bills moving forward. Consider it your mandatory investment in my company. You owe me your support. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch between us. When I did not immediately pull out my checkbook, his aggressive posture shifted into something entirely malicious. "Listen to me very carefully," Garrison threatened, his tone dripping with cold authority. "You will pay these bills, every single one of them. If you refuse to support my vision, if you choose to be a selfish roadblock to my inevitable success, then you can pack your bags and get the hell out of this apartment." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his words hung heavily in the suffocating air. He was ordering me to vacate my own home, the home I paid for entirely by myself, because I was not enthusiastic enough about funding his newest parasitic venture alongside his deadbeat brother. A normal woman might have screamed. She might have thrown the stack of bills directly into his face and called the police to forcefully evict them both. But as I looked at Garrison's smug, demanding face, watching him eagerly wait for me to either break down in tears or explode in anger, something inside my chest went completely numb. The last remaining tether of my affection snapped. I looked down at the staggering financial demands on the table. I looked at Vance, who was smirking at me from the corner. Then, I looked back into Garrison's expectant eyes. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I simply offered a slow, completely hollow nod of agreement. "Okay," I said softly. Instantly, the tension drained from Garrison's shoulders. A wide, triumphant smile spread across his face. He puffed out his chest, genuinely believing he had completely broken my spirit and cemented his absolute dominance over my life. He had absolutely no idea that my quiet surrender was not a victory for him. It was the moment I decided to destroy him. For the next 3 weeks, I became the perfect, hollow shell of a supportive partner. Every morning, my alarm buzzed at 5 o'clock. I would rise in the dim light, carefully navigating the suffocating heat of the hallway, and step over the scattered remnants of late-night takeout boxes left by Garrison and Vance. I cooked heavy, greasy breakfast that I never ate, sizzling bacon and scrambled eggs for 2 men who slept until noon while the deafening hum of their cryptocurrency machines vibrated through the walls. I washed their plates, I gathered their discarded laundry, I ironed Garrison's shirts, smiling placidly whenever he grunted. "Make sure you use the heavy starch on the collars. Piper, I have important investor meetings." I was a ghost in my own home, floating through the motions, letting them believe I was entirely broken and compliant. Their delusion escalated rapidly. Despite not having mined a single usable fraction of digital currency, Garrison and Vance began celebrating their impending wealth. Every Friday and Saturday night, the apartment was invaded by loud, obnoxious acquaintances. I would sit quietly in the bedroom, listening to the pounding bass of their music and the clinking of expensive liquor bottles bought with my money. Garrison would hold court in the center of the living room, shouting over the roar of the cooling fans, bragging about profit margins and disruptive market strategies to a room full of sycophants. "We are going to buy a private island by next year," he would yell over the noise. They spilled dark beer on my expensive rugs and left muddy footprints on the hardwood. I never complained. I just cleaned it up the next morning, scrubbing the stains away with a quiet, icy resolve. The mess was temporary. My exit was permanent. During my lunch hour at Aetherist Dynamics, shielded by the privacy of my office, I executed the first phase of my departure. I dialed the direct line for the building management. I spoke to a leasing agent and calmly explained that I needed to break my contract early. The penalty fee was equivalent to 2 months of rent, a massive sum that would make anyone hesitate. I paid it without a single flinch. The leasing agent emailed me the digital termination agreement. I signed my name with a steady hand, officially relinquishing the apartment back to the management company. The termination was set to take effect in exactly 14 days. 14 days until the walls literally closed in on them. Next, I opened my secure banking application. I navigated to the joint accounts and the supplementary platinum card that Garrison kept tucked in his designer wallet. I looked at the recent transaction history: $300 at a high-end steakhouse, $150 at a premium cigar lounge. A sickening rage flared in my chest, but I pushed it down, replacing it with cold calculation. I clicked the security tab and initiated a permanent lock on his card. I timed it perfectly so the block would process late in the evening, ensuring the bank would not notify him immediately. He was completely cut off from my financial lifeline, oblivious to the fact that his wallet was now filled with useless plastic. The most crucial element of my plan required precise timing. Garrison had been loudly boasting about an upcoming virtual pitch meeting with a group of angel investors from the West Coast. He called it the most important day of his professional life. It was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock. I called my internet service provider and navigated the automated menus until I reached a representative. I requested a complete, unrecoverable cancellation of my high-speed fiber optic service to be executed right in the middle of that very Thursday. I then contacted the city electric company, using my account authorization. I ordered a total disconnection of the residential power supply. I made sure to emphasize that the shutoff needed to happen on that specific Thursday afternoon. The foundation of his entire technological empire was about to be pulled out from under him while he was live on camera. With the administrative traps set, I had to ensure my physical escape went unnoticed. The apartment was filled with my valuables, expensive artwork, designer bags, and sentimental keepsakes. I could not just pack up a dozen boxes without raising suspicion. So, I became invisible. Every evening, when I left the office, I stopped at a shipping center and mailed one small, unassuming package to a secure storage facility I had rented across town. I started with the items they never looked at. I swapped my authentic diamond necklace for a cheap cubic zirconia replica from a discount store. I removed the designer shoes from their boxes in the closet and filled the empty cardboard with heavy winter coats to maintain the weight and appearance. When I took a beloved book off the shelf, I subtly spread the remaining volumes apart to eliminate any visible gaps. I took my grandmother's antique silverware, leaving behind the stainless steel everyday pieces. Over the course of 2 weeks, I systematically stripped the apartment of everything I loved. I gutted the core of the home while leaving the fragile, deceitful shell completely intact. Garrison and Vance were so consumed by the flashing lights of their servers and the sound of their own voices that they never noticed the apartment was slowly bleeding dry around them. They were completely blind to the fact that they were standing in a dead zone, waiting for the executioner to flip the switch. Thursday morning arrived with a frantic, buzzing energy that completely shattered the usual oppressive atmosphere of the apartment. Today was the day of their supposed life-changing virtual pitch to the West Coast angel investors. For the first time in months, Garrison and Vance were awake before 8 o'clock. The air was thick with the overwhelming scent of cheap cologne and the continuous, deafening hum of the cryptocurrency servers that were still burning through electricity in the living room. The two brothers had completely commandeered the master bathroom. I stood quietly in the hallway, listening to the aggressive splashing of water and the loud buzzing of electric razors. They were hyping each other up, shouting motivational catchphrases like amateur actors rehearsing for a terrible play. Suddenly, the bathroom door swung open a fraction, and Garrison yelled out into the hallway, "Piper, we need you to go down to the Artisan Bakery on 5th Street. Get the imported smoked salmon bagels, the avocado toast, and 3 large cold brew coffees. We need premium fuel for this presentation. Do not forget to use the Platinum card, and make it quick. We go live in exactly 6 hours." He did not even wait for a response before slamming the door shut again. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that the Platinum card he mentioned was currently a useless piece of plastic, and even more oblivious to the fact that I was not wearing my usual weekend loungewear. I was fully dressed in a sharp, tailored business suit, my sleek carry-on suitcase, meticulously packed with the very last of my essential belongings, sat quietly by the front entrance. "I am on my way," I called back smoothly. My voice was perfectly even, devoid of any trembling, anger, or hesitation. It was the voice of a woman who had already left. I walked over to the front entrance and wrapped my hand around the leather handle of my suitcase. I stepped over the threshold, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. The lock engaged with a sharp, incredibly satisfying click. That single sound echoed clearly in the quiet, carpeted corridor of the building. It was not just a piece of metal sliding into place. It was the definitive punctuation mark at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. It was the permanent end to my silent suffering. I did not head toward the bakery on 5th Street. Instead, I walked straight down to the underground parking garage, bypassed the elevator, and stepped into a private black car service I had pre-booked the night before. I instructed the driver to head directly to the international airport. Aetheris Dynamics was hosting an urgent, high-level strategy summit overseas, and I had aggressively petitioned the executive board for the 3-week assignment. As the car merged onto the highway, watching the city skyline blur past the tinted windows, the crushing weight that had been compressing my chest for months finally began to evaporate. The air inside the vehicle felt incredibly crisp, clean, and pure. For the first time since Garrison had forced his brother into my home, I took a deep, full breath. The further away I got from that apartment, the lighter my bones felt. Once I arrived at the airport and settled comfortably into the quiet sanctuary of the VIP departure lounge, I opened my laptop. I drafted one single, concise email directed to the property management company. I formally attached the digital copy of the early termination agreement that I had signed 2 weeks prior. I stated explicitly that I had officially vacated the premises as of this morning. Furthermore, I boldly noted that the remaining occupants, Garrison and Vance Brooks, had absolutely no legal right or authorization to remain on the property, nor were they permitted to establish a new lease using my financial history as collateral. I reviewed the text one last time and pressed send. The digital anchor tying me to that apartment was permanently severed. Boarding the aircraft felt like stepping through a portal into a completely new reality. I found my assigned seat in the first-class cabin and immediately connected my laptop to the secure boarding network. There was one final crucial financial thread that needed to be cut before I left the country. Garrison drove a luxury German sports car that cost over $80,000 because his credit score was non-existent. The vehicle was financed entirely under my name, with the massive monthly payments set to auto-deduct directly from my primary checking account on the 15th of every month. I logged into my secure banking portal and navigated directly to the automated transfer section. With 3 precise, deliberate clicks, I permanently canceled the auto-pay mandate, but I did not stop there. I completely unlinked my checking account from the car loan registry, removing my routing numbers from their system entirely. I ensured that absolutely no secondary charges, late fees, or penalty deductions could process against my funds. The next time the financing bank attempted to collect their exorbitant payment, they would slam into a solid brick wall. When the default notice inevitably triggered a repossession order, Garrison would be entirely on his own, forced to explain to the repo men why the visionary entrepreneur could not afford his own car. A flight attendant gently approached my seat, offering a glass of sparkling water and instructing passengers to switch all devices to airplane mode. I closed my laptop, powered down my smartphone, and slid them both into my leather briefcase. The jet engines roared to life, a powerful, steady thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a magnificent sound, entirely different from the chaotic, suffocating noise of the mining machines I had left behind. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted off into the sky, pushing me firmly back into my seat, a genuine, unburdened smile finally broke across my face. Up here, 30,000 feet above the ground, I was completely untouchable, and down below, the clock was rapidly, unstoppably ticking toward 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while I was soaring safely above the clouds in the quiet luxury of a first-class cabin, the meticulously constructed illusion of Garrison Brooks violently shattered. I did not need to be standing in the sweltering living room to know exactly how the catastrophe unfolded. The dozens of frantic, hyperventilating voicemails that flooded my smartphone the moment my flight landed overseas painted a vivid masterpiece of pure, unadulterated panic. Sitting comfortably in the back of my chauffeured car on the way to my corporate summit, I listened to the spectacular destruction of his ego. According to his audio logs, Garrison and Vance had just launched into their grand introduction. Garrison was mid-sentence, wearing his heavily starched collar, confidently boasting about revolutionary blockchain scalability to a grid of wealthy West Coast angel investors. Then, without a single flicker of warning, the high-resolution video feed froze. The fiber optic internet connection, which I had scheduled for total termination, vanished completely. The router lights went dead. In a fraction of a second, his million-dollar audience was replaced by a blank, unforgiving black screen. Before they could even process the humiliation of dropping out of their own presentation, the second blow landed with devastating precision. Exactly 3 minutes after the internet termination, the City Electric Company executed my secondary directive. The residential power supply to the entire apartment was severed. The blinding overhead lights shut off. More importantly, the deafening, continuous mechanical roar of Vance and his massive cryptocurrency mining operation died instantly. The heavy industrial fans spun to a silent halt. Without a backup generator or an uninterrupted power supply, the sudden electrical blackout was catastrophic for their sensitive equipment. The servers crashed hard, wiping out weeks of unsaved computational data and severely corrupting their fragile storage drives. The sweltering living room, once a loud beacon of their arrogant delusions, was plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence. In the audio recordings, I could hear Vance screaming obscenities in the background as he realized his digital goldmine was ruined. The brutal reality of the situation sparked an instant and uncontrollable meltdown. My voicemail inbox turned into a chaotic timeline tracking his mounting desperation. Those initial messages were heavy with his usual aggressive arrogance. He demanded I contact the internet provider immediately, yelling that my negligence was destroying his entire future. Yet as the minutes dragged on, and the power stayed completely dead, his tone quickly unraveled. He dialed my number exactly 47 times over the span of 2 hours. Every new voicemail sounded more unhinged than the previous one. His signature arrogance completely melted into pure panic. He begged me to pick up the phone. He pleaded for my assistance. He screamed into the receiver, stuck next to his brother among the worthless quiet metal shells of his destroyed machines. All he got back was the freezing automated voice of my answering system. It served as a digital wall of complete silence, providing no comfort, no apologies, and absolutely no solutions to the misery he had brought upon himself. The chaos inside the dark, overheating apartment reached its absolute peak when a heavy knock pounded on the front door. It was not the electric company coming to restore the power, it was the building manager, accompanied by a burly security guard. As Garrison narrated through choked sobs on his 30th voicemail, the manager handed him a formal, printed eviction notice. The document explicitly stated that the leaseholder, Piper Davis, had formally surrendered the property and paid all early termination penalties in full. The manager coldly informed the two brothers that they were trespassing on corporate-owned property. They were given exactly 2 hours to gather their personal belongings and vacate the premises, or the local police would be summoned to forcibly remove them for illegal squatting. Garrison tried to argue. He tried to aggressively claim residency rights, but without his name on a single legal document, his protests were completely meaningless. The manager simply tapped his wristwatch and told them the countdown had already begun. Driven by blind survival instinct, Garrison scrambled to pack his designer suits in the dark, abandoning his brother to deal with the heavy servers. He dragged his heavy suitcases down to the lobby. Garrison pulled out his smartphone to book a luxury suite at a nearby 5-star hotel, fully intending to charge the exorbitant daily rate to my supplementary platinum card, as he always did. He stood at the polished reception desk, projecting a false air of temporary inconvenience, and confidently handed the plastic card to the concierge. The machine beeped, flashing a bright red error message. The card was permanently locked. Garrison demanded they run it again, his voice cracking with desperation. The result was the same. The final, crushing realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He was not just homeless and humiliated, he was completely broke. He had no access to my credit lines, no access to my checking accounts, and absolutely zero personal savings to his name. The concierge politely asked him to step aside, leaving the great visionary entrepreneur standing on the sidewalk with his luggage, completely paralyzed by the crushing weight of reality. It did not take long for Garrison to weaponize his own humiliation. By the time I settled into my luxury hotel suite halfway across the world, my phone began to buzz relentlessly. It was not Garrison this time. It was the predictable wave of flying monkeys, operating from a place of deep-seated narcissism. Garrison took to every social media platform he could access from his smartphone. He crafted a long, agonizingly dramatic post detailing his sudden homelessness. He painted a masterful portrait of a tragic, misunderstood genius who had been ruthlessly discarded by a heartless woman right at the exact moment he needed her most. He claimed I had abandoned him in his darkest hour, leaving him on the streets just as his business was about to take off. He described himself sitting on his luggage, looking up at the apartment he had poured his soul into, only to be locked out by the person he trusted implicitly. He played the victim with an Oscar-worthy performance, entirely omitting the industrial fans, the deafening servers, and the staggering utility bills he had tried to force upon me. Within minutes, messages from our mutual friends flooded my inbox. People I had hosted in my home, people who had drank my expensive wine and eaten the food I paid for, were suddenly aggressively eager to condemn me. A girl named Sarah sent a lengthy message accusing me of kicking a man while he was down, writing that I was prioritizing my corporate greed over human decency. A guy named Mark, who frequently attended those loud Friday night parties to drink my premium liquor, told me I was cold-blooded and entirely unsupportive of an entrepreneur's difficult journey. The tone of their messages was dripping with harsh judgment and righteous indignation. They demanded explanations. They demanded that I make things right, fly back immediately, and apologize to the man I had supposedly destroyed. The sheer volume of their collective ignorance was astonishing. A normal person might have felt compelled to defend themselves against such a vicious character assassination. They might have typed out a 5,000-word essay explaining the emotional abuse, the constant financial drain, and the absolute disrespect of having his brother moved in without a single discussion. But I did not waste my breath or my keyboard strokes on a long, defensive explanation. Truth does not need a megaphone when it has verifiable receipts. I opened my cloud storage and selected a specific folder I had meticulously compiled weeks ago. It contained high-resolution screenshots of the joint credit card statements, highlighting dozens of transactions that Garrison had authorized under my name. I selected the records showing him spending $400 on vintage cigars in a single afternoon. I highlighted the receipts for tailored Italian suits costing over $1,500 apiece. I included the massive invoices for the cryptocurrency servers that were billed entirely to my personal credit line, totaling over $20,000 in a single month. Finally, I added the pièce de résistance. I attached a certified bank document proving that he had absolutely zero income for the past 36 months. He had been living exclusively off my corporate salary while claiming to be a self-made founder to everyone on his friend list. I did not write a lengthy, emotional caption. I simply created a public post tagging every single mutual friend who had messaged me with their misplaced outrage. My caption was precisely one sentence. I wrote, "For those deeply concerned about the tragic downfall of a visionary entrepreneur, here is the complete financial reality of his highly successful business model." I pressed publish and set my phone on silent, pouring myself a glass of aged red wine to enjoy the evening view from my hotel window. The digital shockwave was immediate and utterly devastating. The narrative flipped in a matter of seconds. The very same people who had been violently defending his honor just minutes prior suddenly realized they had been manipulated by a parasitic con artist. The loud, judging voices fell completely silent as they digested the staggering numbers on my credit statements. Then, the public backlash began. Sarah quickly deleted her hateful message to me and left a scathing comment on Garrison's original post, calling him a pathetic fraud and demanding he return the $200 he had borrowed from her last month. Mark publicly removed his endorsement of Garrison's fake startup page and posted a mocking status about fake founders. The widespread boycott was swift and brutal. Garrison was stripped of his victimhood and left exposed as nothing more than an entitled leech. He became an absolute pariah in our social circle in less than an hour. While Garrison was furiously trying to delete the flood of negative comments while standing on the sidewalk, his own flesh and blood delivered the final, devastating insult. Vance, realizing that the free ride was permanently over and that his younger brother was now a massive social and financial liability, decided to cut his losses immediately. According to the frantic, fragmented messages that Garrison would later send me, Vance did not even say a proper goodbye. He simply snatched the keys to the luxury sports car, the very same car that was about to be repossessed by the bank anyway, and drove away without a backward glance. Vance abandoned his younger brother stranded on the pavement, surrounded by heavy suitcases and the ruined husks of their failed digital empire. Late that evening, a single pathetic email arrived in my secure inbox. It was from Garrison. Gone was the arrogant businessman who had ordered me out of my own home. Gone was the righteous victim from social media. The email was a groveling display of sheer desperation. He begged me to call him. He pleaded for me to take down the financial statements, claiming they were unfairly destroying his professional reputation in the industry. He promised he would change, vowing to get a regular 9-to-5 job and pay me back every single penny over the next 10 years. The most hilarious part of his desperate essay was his cowardly attempt to deflect blame. He claimed that the immense pressure of the startup world had clouded his judgment, and that he only pushed me so hard because he was stressed about building an empire for our future family. He asked me to fly back and fix the situation, still believing, somewhere deep in his delusional mind, that I was just a mechanism designed to solve his problems. I read the email once, smiled at the sheer audacity of his excuses, and dragged it straight into the digital trash bin. Exactly 1 month passed since the day I boarded that international flight. 30 days of absolute peace, lucrative corporate negotiations, and uninterrupted sleep. When I finally returned to the city, the air felt entirely different. I was no longer the exhausted, compliant woman rushing home to fund a grown man's delusions. I had been promoted to senior director during the summit. My bank accounts were thriving, and the suffocating apartment lease was a distant, resolved memory. On a brisk Tuesday morning, I found myself standing in the dingy lobby of a low-rent commercial building on the far east side of the city. I was there to drop off some routine notarized documents for my personal attorney. The contrast between my sharp, tailored designer suit and the peeling, water-damaged wallpaper of the lobby was incredibly stark. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke, cheap bleach, and desperation. I pressed the up button for the elevator and waited patiently, watching the digital floor indicator slowly descend. With a loud, mechanical groan, the rusty elevator doors slid open. I stepped aside to let the passengers exit. There, shuffling out with his head hung low, was Garrison Brooks. For a fraction of a second, I did not even recognize him. The man standing before me was a hollow, decaying shell of the arrogant visionary I had left behind. His expensive grooming was entirely gone. His dark hair was greasy and unkempt, his face covered in a patchy, unwashed beard. He was wearing a wrinkled gray hooded sweatshirt and stained denim jeans. He looked exactly like a man who had not slept in a real bed or eaten a proper meal for weeks. He lifted his heavy head, and his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. A massive jolt of pure shock registered on his pale face, rapidly replaced by a desperate, hungry gleam. The ingrained muscle memory of his endless manipulation immediately kicked in. "Piper!" he gasped, lunging forward aggressively to block my path to the elevator. His voice was hoarse and frantic. "Piper, you have to talk to me. I have been trying to find you for weeks. You blocked my number and email." I stood my ground, my expression as cold and unyielding as a marble statue. I did not say a single word, allowing his own pathetic, chaotic energy to fill the awkward silence of the lobby. "You ruined me," he continued, his tone shifting rapidly into that familiar, aggressive victimhood. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at my chest. "You completely destroyed my life. I lost the angel investors. I lost the expensive server equipment because the sudden power loss fried the main motherboards. Vance abandoned me on the street and stole the sports car. I am currently sleeping on a dirty, flea-infested couch in a damp basement belonging to a guy I barely know. You broke our verbal business contract when you maliciously shut off the utilities and abandoned the lease without giving me proper legal notice." He stepped closer, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate me, completely forgetting that he held absolutely no power over me anymore. "I was just up there speaking with a budget lawyer on the 3rd floor. I have solid legal grounds to sue you for breach of contract, financial sabotage, and severe emotional distress. But I do not want to drag the woman I once loved through a messy public court battle. I am willing to be reasonable. If you just write me a cashier's check for $50,000 right now, to compensate for my destroyed hardware, my lost operational time, and my current living expenses, I will tell my lawyer to drop the civil lawsuit. We can walk away clean. You owe me that much for what you did." Piper. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his demand was almost poetic. He was entirely broken, wearing filthy clothes, standing in a cheap commercial lobby. Yet he was still attempting to extort $50,000 from me based on a complete legal fabrication. I did not laugh. I did not yell in anger. I simply opened my structured leather tote bag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I did not hand it to him. Instead, I let it drop forcefully onto the scratched, wobbly coffee table sitting next to us. The heavy slap of the paper echoed loudly in the empty lobby. "Open it," I commanded. My voice was low, sharp, and carried an absolute authority that made him physically flinch. Garrison looked at the thick folder, then back at me, his false bravado faltering instantly. His trembling hands reached down and flipped open the heavy cover. Sitting right on top was a stack of highly sensitive financial documents. But they were not my personal credit card statements this time. They were commercial bank loan applications. "While you were busy crying on social media and begging your cheap lawyer to invent a fake civil lawsuit," I began, my words precise and lethal, "I was having a very interesting conversation with my private wealth manager. It seems that 2 months ago, you registered a fraudulent limited liability company, and under that fake company name, you applied for a $200,000 commercial business loan." Garrison's face drained of all color. He stared at the printed papers, his breathing suddenly turning rapid and shallow. "The bank denied the loan. Of course," I continued smoothly, watching his eyes dart across the pages. "But that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is the collateral guarantor section on page 4. You see, Garrison, you listed me as the primary financial guarantor for that massive corporate loan, and right there, at the bottom of the page, is my signature." I leaned in just an inch, making sure he caught every single syllable over the ambient noise of the building. "Except, I never signed that document. You forged my signature to attempt a 6-figure financial theft against a federally insured bank. You thought I would just be another silent victim of your endless financial abuse." "Piper, I can explain," he stammered, stepping backward, his hands shaking violently as he dropped the folder back onto the table. "I just needed seed money. It was temporary. I would have paid the loan back before you even knew about it. You have to believe me." "I do not have to believe anything," I replied, my voice slicing through his pathetic excuses like a freshly sharpened razor blade. "I did not bring those documents here to negotiate a settlement with you. Garrison, I brought copies for my attorney upstairs just as a formality, because yesterday morning, I handed the original, notarized files directly to the corporate fraud division of the National Bank, and they immediately forwarded the entire dossier to the Federal Financial Crimes Investigative Unit. The lead investigator was extremely eager to review your case." The final, devastating truth slammed into him. The realization of his impending doom washed over his face. erasing every trace of his former arrogance. "You are not going to civil court for a fake breach of contract," I stated plainly, delivering the final crushing blow. "You are going to face a federal judge for identity theft, forgery, and massive wire fraud. You are not facing bankruptcy. Garrison, you are facing up to 15 years in a federal prison." Garrison Brooks, the man who had spent years demanding my total submission and draining my life force, completely broke. His knees buckled instantly. He collapsed entirely, crashing down onto the filthy linoleum floor of the lobby. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing wail of pure terror. He was completely defeated, crushed under the absolute weight of his own criminal actions. I looked down at his sobbing, pathetic form for one final second. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, no sorrow, just a profound, beautifully quiet emptiness. I turned my back on him forever. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the lobby and stepped out into the crisp, bright morning air. The sun hit my face, warm and radiant. I took a deep, unrestricted breath, filling my lungs with the sweet air of total independence. I adjusted my designer bag on my shoulder and walked forward, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement, striding proudly into a brilliant, unburdened life that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.